All right, hello. It is 3 p.m. Is Buck on?
I am.
Hey, Buck, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. We can't see you, but
I can turn it back on. I
that's
was,
up to you. I probably should have warned you about this. We normally just start with a quick minute from our mortgage person, Shane, who just has a 2-minute update on the market, if you don't mind, and then
yeah,
we'll head
fine.
over to
Whatever.
you.
Yep.
So, Shane, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Okay. All right. So I don't have a big microphone like that though. That thing's intimidating. That's impressive, you know.
Well,
That's
I'm a podcaster, so
nice.
Pro podcaster, we're doing this as a hobby. This is what he does for a living, so he knows.
I gotta get one of those for Christmas. That thing's fantastic. So yeah, just a quick mortgage update here, guys. So we challenged our all-time lows last week. We started to brush up close to like 2.99%. I quoted that a couple times on Thursday and Friday for people that have great credit, good down payment. Monday and Tuesday rates did increase a little bit. Today, for those of you that have seen that the Dow is down quite a bit. It was down over 900 points last time I saw. So crazy market times, but we did kind of scrape under 3% for about a day last week for a 30-year fix. So still phenomenal mortgage rates right now. I brought a woman, talked to her about refinancing, brought her down from 5.125% down to 2.75 on a 15-year fix last week and locked her in. So the 15-year fixed is almost securely under 3% over the past week and a half. So really nice opportunity for if you or past clients or whatever are looking to kind of chop their mortgage timeline. She saved over $42,000 of interest over the life of the loan. So that's something to keep in mind, and let us know what we can do to help for a purchase or a refinance. We're available weekdays, weeknights, weekends.
All right, great. Thank you, Shane. Anybody have any questions on mortgages before we head over to Buck? Anybody at all? All right. Well, thank you so much, Shane. Appreciate your time. And
thanks.
Let's introduce Buck. Buck, some of our folks are familiar with you from you were the keynote speaker at our last investment conference. But if you could maybe, I know you have a presentation you're going to walk through with us, but if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, that would be helpful.
Yeah, it'll be part of my presentation as well. But basically, I think the way, I'm a podcaster, right? And that's how Al found me. My podcast is called Wealth Formula, and available on iTunes, Stitcher, et cetera, et cetera. Hard to sort of just give you a 30 quick and dirty what I do, but ultimately right now I'm primarily in commercial real estate, and on the back end of my podcast. I have a large equity group that's continuously expanding. Accredited investors, anybody can join basically. Probably about 1,400 people in that. Raised about $100 million in the last 18 months or so. Placed $100 million basically. So we got about 300, maybe $350 million worth of assets under management. So yeah, that's my story, and I'll get into a little bit more of it in a bit. Got me to keep going now?
Yeah, you cut out there for a second, but yeah, I'm just turning it over to you. If you need anything from me, let me know. But we're here and excited to listen and learn.
Okay, so why don't I just get started? Is that all right? Should I just get started?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
You're cutting out a little bit. I don't know if it's just me or is everyone else okay with can hear Buck okay?
Yeah, Buck, you're coming in through all right.
You're coming through. Yeah. Okay. So it's just Al?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Sounds good. All right, so everyone, thanks for having me, Al. Thanks for having me back. I was out there in Bergen County last year doing a talk. It was nice for Al to invite me to come out. As I just mentioned, Al found me ultimately, I guess, probably through iTunes, and I'm a podcaster, and my podcast is called Wealth Formula. And I did a similar talk to this last year, and so I'm gonna do this talk, and because it's really sort of forms the basis of my investing thesis. And then afterwards, I think we can open it up. We can talk. We can do some Q&A. We can talk about where the economy is right now and what my opinion of it is, and we'll go from there. And so, well, let's see. I'll just get started here. So again, as an introduction, we're going to start talking a little bit about me. Then I'm going to go over wealth paradigms, from the simple to the more complex, which ultimately brings me to this theme of wealth 2.0, which is something I often talk about. And as part of that, it'll be an introduction or a review for some of you on what I call the mathematical wealth formula. Because if the show is called Wealth Formula, obviously there's got to be some math to it, right? And then I'm going to give you some real examples of how you can use this formula to create more wealth in a shorter period of time, and certainly how I have done it. I'll even, talk to you a little bit about some of the results that we've had in our investing group from that. So who am I? First and foremost, what I didn't mention is I am a board certified surgeon. I started out in neurosurgery, did head and otolaryngology, head and neck surgery, and then ultimately plastic surgery. And then I retired from surgery at the age of 42. So in practice, I was only there for about 7 or 8 years after 34 years of school. So a big, long training, and I didn't do it for very long. And one of the reasons I didn't do it is because I got the itch as an entrepreneur. Started up, initially my practices, turned them into businesses. Then I got interested in real estate, as I mentioned earlier. We've got probably about $350 million worth of real estate under management in my accredited investor club, which is open to anybody who's accredited. And finally, I'm the soul of my entire business is ultimately my podcast. It's a financial education podcast in the alternative podcast space called Wealth Formula, which you can get on iTunes or Stitcher or YouTube, you name it. We're pretty much there. Second here. I could figure out how to do. There we go. So my journey kind of started. I always show this picture because it's like, I don't know if anybody knows who this guy is, but this is Robert Kiyosaki. He wrote the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is the #1 selling financial book in history. He also wrote a book called Cash Flow Quadrant, which was really the book that I accidentally ran into a week after finishing my surgical training that really absolutely sort of transformed my life. If you have not read it, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, fine, but Cash Flow Quadrant, I highly recommend you read. It had such a tremendous impact on me. Robert is I think he's kind of an odd guy. If any of you listen to his podcast, he's got, he's turned into a bit of a conspiracy theorist over the years and things like that. But I'll tell you, his impact on so many entrepreneurs and real estate investors is just unbelievable. And I definitely fell into that. Now, what I learned from Robert initially, though, was really about, this idea that there was more to this world than just getting a job and, putting money into, giving my money over to a financial advisor. It was about entrepreneurship and the freedom that comes with making your own decisions and making your own money. But what Robert is really, I think, famous for is this idea of cash flow investing. And, it's like the aha moment that so many people have, the idea of buying cash flow real estate until the streams of income are enough to support your lifestyle, and then, basically being able to quit your day job. And so when I
Hey,
discovered,
Buck, just so you know, and not to interrupt you, but just so you know, you're talking to the right audience. Probably, I would bet half the people here have read those two books, and we've even had the board game. We played the Robert Kiyosaki board games in some of our classes, and we teach classes on it. So I think a lot of the people here will be familiar with those concepts.
well, that's great. And I should point out too that I've got Robert on my podcast interview schedule. It'll be our second time he's on later on this month. So make sure you pay attention. And find the podcast. I've known him now for a few years, and it should be a good show again. So, so I came into this picture, in a slightly different situation than I think a lot of people do, and certainly, all of you are at a high level making good money and stuff. But a lot of people who read Rich Dad, Poor Dad for the first time, they come away with this idea of really, this dream of buying cash flowing real estate to retire, to replace their income. But the problem for me here was that as an entrepreneur and starting to think about investing, the real estate model that Robert talked about in those initial books really didn't seem to make a lot of sense. It didn't seem to be particularly efficient. I was making over $1 million a year already. It was ordinary income, paying, was living in the Chicago area, paying $400,000 or $500,000 in taxes per year. So, and the typical real estate investment that I was looking at, and just cash on cash at the time, let's just say it was around 10%. I mean, with some leverage. And so that was pretty average, I would say. And then, so I started doing the math and thinking to myself, well, how long would it take me to get to $1 million per year in passive cash flow to replace my income at an average of 10% per year cash on cash? And so if you do the math backwards, of course, I'd have to invest $10 million in real estate. And if I was paying half of it into taxes already, boy, that's going to take me a while, right? It's going to take me a while. So the bottom line is, what I realized is that the Kiyosaki formula, as he presented it in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is not that easy when you're already used to making a lot of money and you want to, you want to reproduce that sort of result of replacing your income. And that's why I call this a Wealth 1.0 alternative investing model. The funny thing is that, Robert wrote that book, and those, I talked to him about how if you read his books, they become increasingly complex. And Rich Dad, Poor Dad is the first one in that series. And it's really, that one is for the masses. And then Cash Flow Quadrant was written for a slightly more advanced, high paid professional, potentially crowd. And so they become increasingly complex as you continue to read them. And the ideas become a lot more sophisticated as well. I think Robert's point here was to get this common idea out there, but really, if you look at how he invests himself, it very much reflects what we're going to get into with Wealth 2.0, because I know very much what Robert invests with, because I'm investing the same way. So Wealth 2.0 is the title I've kind of given this other way of creating wealth, which is ultimately answers the question: how do you create wealth faster? How do you create wealth with less money? And this really is the key to creating wealth, and the secret, so to speak, of the wealthiest people in the world. And part of what I do and what I've done in the last few years that's helped me crack the code is, I study these types of people closely, come up with some of what they do. And ultimately there's an equation that I think describes a wealth formula, the best. And it's kind of a ripoff of Newtonian physics and momentum, but that's the science math geek in me. But what I say is wealth equals mass times velocity times leverage. Okay. And in my equation, and we're going to get into each one of these variables separately, but mass is the amount of money you invest. Okay, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Velocity, how quickly your invested capital comes back in your pocket, and that's a little bit different from just yield, the way we're going to think about it, because it's gonna really create a different idea in your head, or at least revive it from other things that you're already aware of. And then, of course, leverage, which everybody in real estate is very familiar with leverage, but using mortgages, other people's money, other kinds of amplification strategies. So let's starting with mass, of course. Here there's a couple of problems. Like if you want to invest more period, you can only invest so much per year. You've got taxes to pay. Taxes are usually the people's biggest expense. If you think about a business operating, and a business having, its largest expenses from a personal financial standpoint, it's pretty rare for most people where taxes is not their single biggest, pure expense. So how do you increase mass? That's one of the questions. And one of the solutions is to legally really minimize your taxes. We'll talk a little bit about that. One book I would highly recommend you read is a book by Tom Wheelwright called Tax-Free Wealth. Tom is my CPA. He's also famous because he's Robert Kiyosaki's CPA. So he is a genius. He's got his own podcast called Wealth Ability, and he's been on my podcast a number of times as well. But legally minimizing your taxes, which is huge. I haven't paid more than 10-15% in taxes in a decade, and I've consistently been above seven figures and multiple seven figures in terms of my personal AGI. The other solution to increasing mass, and again, mass being how much you can invest, is not necessarily thinking, well, the only money I have to invest, I got to get $10 million into these investments so that I can, get my $1 million of cash flow, is to actually recycle your capital. And that's something that we're going to talk about a little bit as well, that has a unique property of real estate in particular, which obviously you guys will probably be somewhat familiar with. So again, minimizing taxes, really, if you've got to look at the way that people view taxes, and you have to have the right CPA. It is incredibly critical because the tax law is just a series of incentives provided by the government. That's all the tax law is. There's only just, a handful of pages that tell you, this is where you pay tax. The rest of the tax law and tax code tell you about ways that you can get around paying taxes. And so having a very, very good CPA is critically important. And, there's lots of things out there that, people who have W-2 income even can benefit from. A good example is oil and gas. I mean, we're doing in our investor group, we have a oil and gas opportunity right now. And if you invest $100,000 into that, you write off that $100,000 off of any kind of income, and then you just wait for the upside of what happens here. Now, of course, I'm not a huge oil and gas guy, so I wouldn't let the tax wag the tail all the time. But on the other hand, knowing about this kind of stuff is huge. In real estate, we have what I'm sure, maybe all of you already know about, bonus depreciation in conjunction with the cost segregation analysis, which basically allows you to write off a significant portion of your investment in some kind of rental real estate, and therefore create both cash flow and equity and tax write-offs immediately. So, for example, you invested $100,000 into either a real estate syndication, or say you just put down $100,000 into a commercial property yourself, and say that opportunity yielded 8 to 10% cash on cash. you know, if you do a cost segregation analysis and you break down, you know, real property from chattel, and that chattel is, as you know, is depreciated at 5 years. Bonus depreciation allows you right now to take that all in the first year. So theoretically, you can get, you know, over 100% of your investment written off against your other passive income, or any income if you are designated as a real estate professional. And so that's an incredible gain right off the front, right? If you don't have to pay taxes, you invested $100,000 and then you deduct $100,000. And if you're paying 50% in taxes, well, you just, you know, you just save yourself 50 grand right there, right? So anyway, that's a huge thing in terms of minimizing taxes. So thinking about your investments as tax efficient investments, and in real estate, that's, you know, that's pretty easy to do. And I will say, this is totally real. And it, you know, we, as Al knows, we have, and there's a couple people within your audience that are in our investor group, and we, you know, we did cost segregation analysis on all of our properties, you know, and most of them, I think, came out to about 70 or 80% of what people invested. Their K1 showed losses, but we had a couple with a certain model that we did that actually showed over 100% loss, 106% actually, of losses for investors. So if they invested $100,000, they got a K1 saying that they lost 106. So this is real. This is not theoretical stuff. And so let's get to the next variable, which is velocity. And again, so what is the goal? Again, right? The idea that I had initially was, okay, well, how am I going to replace this $1 million if that's what you're supposed to do, if that's the name of the game? Well, if your goal is to replace, you know, $500,000, which is what you carried home and you were paying 50% taxes on $1 million, well, it'll get you, you know, it will take you $1 million. It will really take you about $1 million years and $5 million to get your goal. But what's a more efficient way to accelerate the growth of your capital? And this is where, again, we're going to talk about recycling it. And this will be familiar to you and it's just a twist on it. But, you know, I always say, you know, 10% or 15% cash on cash returns are good. We all, at least that's what I think. Maybe you don't. But I think that's good, but infinite returns is much better. In other words, you don't have any money in a deal, yet you're getting a return. That's ideal. That's the ideal place to be. And in commercial real estate in particular, that is a very realistic thing to do, something we do frequently. And the reason for this that makes this possible is two things. One is the ability to borrow, of course, 70 to 80% of the money for the asset from the bank. And then the second thing is the way that commercial real estate is valued. Now, when I'm talking about commercial real estate, by the way, it's large residential. My group is primarily involved in apartment buildings. So, you know, 200 unit plus apartment buildings, average, you know, the average cost of acquisitions, maybe about 30 million. But, you know, there's a range 25 to 75 million. Anyway, the key point here, though, is that commercial real estate is valued not by what someone thinks, right? But rather by the net operating income generated by the property, right? So, you know, you've seen cash out refis, I'm sure, you know, when people flip houses and they get their money back and stuff, but you know, part of it becomes a little tricky because it's in the eye of the beholder of how much it's actually worth. But in commercial real estate, it's all math. You drive up the income of the property, the net operating income, and that will drive up the value of the property. And again, as I said, a cash out refi is a good example of pulling out equity, get returns that are infinite. But, you know, in residential real estate, again, the limitation is, you know, in the 1 to 4 unit residential is that it's subjective. You know, it's something is only worth what somebody thinks it's worth. And that's, again, the big difference there is in commercial real estate. For a guy like me who likes numbers, it's math, right? It can be an ugly building. No one cares if it's ugly. Honestly, no one cares. You know, one of my general partners from Western Wealth Capital Dave Steele and I joke about it all the time. It's a kind of real estate that, you know, you don't really brag about at parties, right? This is like, you know, working class stuff. It's ugly, B minus, C plus class, but you know, you can seriously crank up net operating income and make a lot of money doing this kind of stuff. But it's math. It's not about pretty stuff. You know, and I'll tell you, in real estate syndications, I have invested in them over time. And if you know Robert Kiyosaki, you probably know Ken McElroy, who's another friend of mine, and he's also going to be on the show again shortly. By the way, if you're a fan of his, ABCs of real estate, et cetera. But it's not, you know, it's not uncommon for a full cash out refi in 5 years with a good value add program. You know, you put in 100,000, get it back in 5 years, recycle the money into new property while maintaining ownership and cash flow on the initial property. So when you do that, of course, what's great is that now you're making money in two places at the same time with the same initial capital investment. So that's the idea of recycling money. You need less mass if you can recycle your money over and over into new investments. You're not going to need 5 million anymore. You might need $1 million or maybe just a couple million, right? But the key here is understanding is velocity, right? It's all about speed. How quickly can you get that money back in your hands? 5 years is not bad, right? But what if you could do it quicker? So I'm a general partner, again, as I mentioned, with a group called Western Wealth Capital. And the CEO, and one of my general partners, she is a computer scientist. And so we model this out, and the idea was, okay, the premise here is we know that we have a certain value add that we can do. And when we do that value add, we can increase rent and we can decrease expenses, and and therefore increase the value of a property. But the one variable that most value add investors don't really think too much about is time, right? Because if you can do the same thing in 2 years or 3 years that another group can do in 5, your IRR is going to go way up. It's going to go way, way up. And so the question we have is, how can we go even faster? So what we've done through my partnership with Western Wealth Capital is we use a supplemental loan program from Freddie Mac that allows us basically from the outset to have a loan that is, you know, technically up to the acquisition price. The loan to value that is taken is about 72 or 73%. So it's not like you're leveraging super high. But what we do is when we take that loan, what it allows us to do is effectively create value. And then you can basically pull out money with appraisals without refinance. And you can do that over and over for free. And of course, that's cheap. So what we do is we sprint to make improvements from day one, literally buy a property, you know, we close on it. We've got crews out there from day one. Every bit of paint, every bit of, you know, signage, everything has already been decided on. This is not like hurry up and wait, right? It is the McDonaldization of large multifamily assets. We put in washer dryers, change cabinets while people are at work. We don't wait till they move out, right? We just ask people, hey, you know, would you like us to, you know, put in, you know, update your unit while you're at work? And most people say yes. So that's basically how it works. The loan, again, as I said, I already mentioned this, but it's designed so that we don't need to refinance. So instead, we just pull out money with appraisals every 12 to 18 months. It's quick and cheap. And again, we talked about that 5-year model. Well, here, now we have an average time of 50% return on capital in about 18 months. And that can go into, you know, a new investment at that point, right? So if you had 100 grand in, you put 12 to 18 months later, all of a sudden you have 50 grand, you put that into something else. Now you're waiting for that one, and that comes back and you put it into the next one. Now, full capital return time has been, it averages 30 months or less. And of course, none of this is on any of the pro formas we do, but these are actual numbers. To just give you an idea, this isn't an N of one. This is we've done a lot of properties. Western Wealth Capital says 59, but a few more than that. Now, this is an outdated slide about, just under 12,000 units, $1 billion in purchases, $408 million in equity placed. So again, here's the model. Again, you've got, you increase net operating income, you increase the value of the property. So here's an example, a Gold Star renovation that might cost $6,000 or $7,000. Looks great, right? Big difference there. You do that to 200 units, net operating income, goes up, and each one of these results in $30,000 in value, and that will add $6 million in value at current cap. And similarly, if you just dissect down a washer dryer, 200 units, you put these in, they're a couple $100. Each one adds $50 per month to the rent. That increases NOI times 200. Boom, $2 million added to the value of the property. Now, I talked about those refinances and how that works. They're not refinances, they're appraisals basically, so that they're cheap and quick. These are some examples, 13 refinances and 3 of them on the second round. Again, this is a little outdated. We have more than that here, but what you can see here again is in this column, which each one cumulative returns after refi, not including cash flows. So the Edgewater, what it shows that in 16 months, investors got 71% of their capital back so that they could reinvest it somewhere else. Now, they're not losing equity, by the way, right? They're not losing equity in the property when this happens. They are just getting their money back so that they can deploy somewhere else. Similarly, you see the Scottsdale Hacienda, 15 months, 55% of the money back in your pocket to invest somewhere else. So it makes a big difference to how quickly you can start deploying capital. And on top of that, because of these value add programs, and the sort of McDonaldization of the thing, what we've had is we've had situations where we can sell a lot of properties at once, and that also has helped with getting really good returns, annualized returns for investors. These are investor returns on these properties. Again, there's a couple more in there, but the average annualized return remains 30%. You see some of them going 50, 68%, and then there's some that are 11 or 12. Those are early ones. This is a very powerful model. And one thing I'll tell you is that people ask what does this look like for an investor? And there's a great story. One of the early investors started out about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. 6 years ago, he started out, invested out of his own pocket, in every deal for like 4 or 5 years, and got up to the point where he had put in $750,000 out of pocket. But because of these refis, and because every time you had one of these divestments and he was getting these big lump sums of money back, and then he was reinvesting them over the course of 5 years, that $750,000 out of pocket is now $4 million in principal. Now he doesn't put anything out of pocket. He just continuously invests in that $4 million. So this is like, this is the effect of leverage and the effect of mass and the effect of velocity, right? This is really possible even for a passive investor. And of course, the final, I talked about wealth equals mass times velocity times leverage. And obviously you've seen the role of leverage in these, these infinite return models. Leverage depreciation, increase yield, and now infinite returns. It's not just, but leverage is not just about money, bank money. It's anything that levers the resources that you have. And I'll just briefly mention, you can do this in all sorts of things, right? I mean, you It's all about who you know and all the, all the different strategies out there that they can do things. You can even do it with tax deductions. I mean, what if you could leverage your charitable giving so that $100,000 of giving resulted in a $500,000 write-off? Well, that's possible. It's something called conservation easements. Um, basically the idea there is you write off the valuation of the property's of land's potential rather than purchase price, and give up the right to develop the land. This is a complex thing. The IRS hates this stuff, but it is legal. The IRS does not make the law. The Congress does. But, again, these things you got to be very, very careful about, because, you have to have providers who know what they're doing and do things by the book. But it is another way to use leverage to enhance your wealth and to multiply things quicker. So in conclusion, basically, you've got, this model, which is what I call Wealth 2.0. And I think of it as a significant upgrade over the 4 houses to a hotel model that Robert talks about. But believe me, Robert Kiyosaki does not own houses, right? Mostly he invests in syndications, just like I was talking about here. And finally, it's all about the math and knowing the right people and the operators. If you know the math and you know the right jockeys, or maybe you're the jockey, then you can make this happen. I've had this happen to me, so that's my experience. Again, it's wealthformula.com, Wealth Formula Podcast. You can find it. I have a Wealth 1.0 book. It's just another way to potentially get on my list. If you're interested, you can text 44222, type in Wealth Formula, one word. And again, it's a basic investment book and cash flow investing and stuff like that. I'll have more advanced books in the future, but that's sort of the beginner level, probably maybe a little simple for you guys. But
Natalia, can you put that info in the chat? It looks like you probably already are.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
Yeah. They also point out, that the stuff that I'm talking about with the groups that we're working with, all this is through our accredited investor group, which is free to join at wealthformula.com. I think, I think you get those.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's basically, deal flow. You can see a lot of these opportunities we put out. We're not doing a lot right now, and that's because of where we're at in the economy, and we can talk about that a little bit if you'd like. But that's where we do these webinars, and then we take down these assets. And so an accredited investor, I'm sure you know, but in case somebody doesn't, it's not something that you have to apply for. You either are an accredited investor or not. It just means you either make $200,000 or per year, or $300,000 if you're filing jointly, or you have a net worth of at least $1 million out of your personal residence. So bar's not super high, but for some reason the SEC then believes that you can take part in private investments, with operators like us. So anyway, that's all I have. Al, let me kind of turn it back over to you. Do you have any, do you or anybody else have questions or want to talk about
I have a few questions, I guess, or maybe clarification, because I think you probably have, people on this call, from super sophisticated investors to people that are just getting started. So, I don't know if it makes sense taking some time explaining some of the stuff, like cost segregation, is something that I've done that's been very helpful, but I don't know that people really understand what that is. So maybe you want to. Yeah, I have several questions, but not maybe one, because I don't know if you explained it, you just used the term.
Yeah, so, cost segregation, if you remember from getting your real estate license, I think everybody's a real estate agent or broker here, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's basically, if you remember, you can separate property into real property and chattel basically being, personal property, or things that you can pull off, cabinets. You need an engineering study to determine, what parts of the property can be, pulled off and segregated away from the real property. If you do that, of course, the if the property is being depreciated at say 27 and a half years, real property, the component of chattel can be depreciated much quicker. So cost segregation has been used, for years, but the idea was that you could take that chattel part and then depreciate that quicker, like 5 years. But with the new Trump, well, not new anymore, but with Trump's tax changes, what you were allowed to do then, and this is, just a couple years old, is to take that 5-year depreciation and lump it all into the first year because of something called bonus depreciation. And so when we've done that, Al, you've seen the properties that, Dante and I did Sedona Ranch last year in Dallas. And we did a cost segregation analysis on this. This is a $30 million property. And engineering study came in, and basically all the K1s that people got because of that showed this, paper loss of 106% of whatever they invested. So obviously it's a pretty good deal from a tax perspective, because you're getting losses despite the fact that you've created equity.
And you don't have to do it the year that you buy it, right? You can figure this out later. Like our office that we own that houses our Tenafly office, for you Tenafly agents, we've owned it for 5 years. We finally did the cost segregation this year. The study cost, I don't know, $3,000, and I think we wound up saving $100,000 in taxes. So it's a great way, because you can accelerate the deduction into the current year.
Yep. It doesn't have to be. I mean, if you've got any rental property, you can do it. I mean, the problem sometimes is that the question is it cost effective for smaller houses or less expensive houses or whatever. But yeah, there's ways to do it, and certainly if you've got $1 million house that you're renting out, I mean, shoot, why not do it? You know what I mean? You take those losses.
Yeah.
So.
And then I think conservation easements is another big one. I haven't had the nerve to pull the trigger on it, but it's sort of,
yeah,
it seems almost too good to be true. And Buck explained it a little better, but basically you can, whatever the ratio is, say it's 4-to-1, you can pay $100,000 for $400,000 worth of deduction. So it's just like you're just printing.
Yeah,
money.
It's buying a deduction. It's buying a deduction, right?
Yeah.
Is basically what it is. And so, yeah, to your point about the nerve to do it, here's the deal. The IRS hates them. There's constantly an attempt to change the law in Congress, but there's too many people in Congress who use them. So the law becomes very difficult to change. And then there's an interesting situation where you've got conservation people allied with, people who are trying to help wealthy people. But I think the key here is that if you do participate, and I've participated on multiple conservation easements. You have to make sure that you're with the right, somebody who knows what the heck they're doing. Just in my personal experience, I've been through a few audits. It's not been because of conservation easements, but I've got, just got a lot of stuff going on, and the easement comes up. They want to see the K1, they see the K1, and there really isn't anything they can do. I mean, if the IRS wants a challenge, it has to be at the general partnership level, and those things sometimes, they can go on and be 7 or 8 years or whatever. And then typically what there is, if anything, as long as your operator is doing everything and following the laws, there could be a potential decrease in valuation over a period of time. And in which case you may have, this money that you didn't have for 5 or 7 years, and you've doubled it or tripled it by then, and you maybe pay back 10 or 15% of it because the valuation was too high. Anyway, the bottom line is it's one of those things where you have to decide whether it's something that you would do or not. I, again, having been through a couple audits with conservation easements in my return, I've not seen any reason to stop doing that other than the fact that my real estate losses are so substantial, I don't need them anymore. So.
And I have a few other questions, but it looks like we have a question from Maria. I unmuted you. Did you have a question, Maria?
Yes, I do. Just like I said, so you go on to the buildings and you improve every as much as you can to increase the value of the property so that you can refinance, and all this by not raising the rent.
Oh no, you're absolutely raising rent. I mean, that's how you're increasing. That's how you're
Okay.
increasing net operating income. You
But
know,
on those large buildings, don't you have rent control as well?
well, that's part of what your business model has to include. We never buy in blue states. You know, we're in Texas and we're in Arizona. Yeah, there's no rent control there.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's the name of the game. Yep.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it.
Yep. Okay.
I live in California. I would never buy residential, or I would never buy investment real estate in the state of California.
Yeah, it's no better here.
Well, New Jersey is just the same. Yep.
Yeah.
So I had another question. So there are probably some people listening that may not be accredited investors. I was wondering, is there any way around it? Let's say 3 accredited investors pool their money and put it into an LLC. Would that LLC be able to invest in one of your projects?
No, not typically. Yeah, the SEC's kind of, you know, listen, there's, you know, there are some of these crowdfunding portals and stuff where people actually go and, you know, they're actually filing with the SEC. And then, so if you do, you know, regulation crowdfunding and stuff like that, then you can open it up to non-accrediteds, but it's expensive. It's, you know, it takes
You're talking
time.
about like a realty mogul kind of.
Yeah, exactly. And it's expensive and it takes time to do that. And so what ends up happening is that most of if you look at it from the standpoint of like good operators who don't have any problems raising money, it really doesn't make any sense for them to do all that, right? You know, in our Western Wealth Capital or any of our opportunities, I mean, Al, you've probably seen we go on, we say we're raising $8 million or $9 million, and it's usually, you know, it's usually completely committed within 24 hours. So we don't do that. But, you know, I think there's, you could go on those portals and things like that. I think, you know, I'm not a huge fan of them because I think it commoditizes something that I think is, as you all know, being real estate people, is not that easy to commoditize. You know, it's not like you're going, like if I use Ameritrade and I'm buying Apple stock, it's the same stock that I'm buying from if I go to Fidelity. It's just that the real estate doesn't work that way, right? So I think that's the challenge.
Another question I had is, what do you think about, you know, for our folks that are either would want to invest with you or doing their own, you know, smaller deals, given what's going on,
Yeah.
you know, with the prices in the market? Is this, you know, is it going to be a good time to buy? Is prices going to come down on some of these buildings, or?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I think, so I'll tell you, I mean, of course I won't pretend to know everything and act like I know everything, but I'll tell you what I think is going to happen. So right now, you know, from the standpoint of operators, landlords, you know, large landlords, you're seeing a little bit of a shakeup right now, the beginnings of distress. But on the other hand, you know, there's some safety nets in place with some potential forbearance and that sort of thing for landlords. In our case, I'll tell you that we've been fortunate. I think you know, our properties are really well managed, and we, believe it or not, in April actually exceeded our March numbers in terms of income and in terms of occupancy. And May looks like we're going to do just as well. But there are operators that were already not, you know, crushing it in a really good economy that are I think are going to get, I think they're going to get squeezed. Now, the challenge in situations like right now is that it's almost like an earthquake, and it's like in slow motion right now, right? Like we're right in the middle of this thing. And you look at the stock market, and today it got, hit again, but it's, for the most part, it's been about 14%, 15% down. And the thing is that this is not what we're doing right now. And what we're going through is not just a 14, 15% problem. This is a big, big deal, right? So I think all markets right now are still not seeing the full effect of what's going to happen. I think once you start seeing the defaults go through, when the safety nets go down, I think in our groups, the groups and partnerships that I have, we've been talking about this a lot in terms of our current preservation of what we have. We're doing a good job, but we've stopped acquiring because if this is anything like other times in history that we've seen, we would think that the defaults and related tsunami that's following the earthquake would really start probably around Q4, potentially, and then, kind of go through a big, maybe at least half of next year of some distress. Now, that's what, of course, that's my prediction, so to speak, but, I've also been wrong plenty of times. If I'm wrong, then that's great too. And we can make money in both environments. But I do think that if I'm a real estate investor thinking about getting started or about buying, I personally would wait at least until Q4. I do think we're probably going to have a little bit of cap rate decompression once you have some defaults go through. The other thing is, though, that, interest rates are going to, continue to be really low. So I wouldn't expect cap rates to become, historical by any stretch of the imagination, because, cap rates are going to be affected so much by what interest rates do. And a lot of this also depends, in my opinion, on the type of real estate that you're buying. And I'll give you an example from most of what we do is in the large multifamily space. So, 200 units plus, major markets, not New York, but heavy growing markets like Dallas and Phoenix, Scottsdale and stuff. We anticipate that there's going to be a huge pent up demand for this kind of real estate in our space, because there are larger institutional investors that have to place capital somewhere. And what we're seeing right now, and I think what we'll continue to see, is that compared to other asset classes, even within real estate, that multifamily is pretty darn stable. So that's the other pressure that goes the other way. But I do think that in either way, I wouldn't do anything until at least Q4.
Okay, thank you for that. Real quick, we have at least one other question, but what's the best way if somebody, wanted to work with you? What's the best way to reach you? Is it just text that wealth formula to that number, or is there a phone number or website?
Yeah, you could text at 44222 and type wealth formula, one word, but you can also just go to wealthformula.com and sign up for any one of the lists, or if you're an accredited investor and you want to get on that list, you can sign up there as well. But I would encourage,
if you haven't already, Natalia, the website.
Yeah, I'll add it again so that people can have it fresh already.
Yeah, and I would encourage people, if they're, if they listen to podcasts.
Yeah, I love the podcast. One of my favorite podcasts.
Yeah, it's a purely educational thing. And like I said, if you're into Kiyosaki and stuff, Robert's going to be on I'm going to interview him in like 2 weeks, and then probably be shortly thereafter he'll be on. Ken McElroy's going to be on again. So it's a good podcast, I think.
This is the book you were talking about. I just want to show I'm taking your advice.
Yeah.
You can see it there. I got the Tax-Free Wealth.
Yep. Tax-Free Wealth is a good one. And Al, I still think you need to talk to Tom.
Yeah, I did actually. So actually, Till and Lisa had a question. Are you on, Till and Lisa?
Yes, I am. You mostly answered. I was curious about how you're adjusting your management strategy with your current assets. If imagine you're focusing more on tenant retention and maybe easing up on the capital improvements, but just wondering what your strategies were around the assets that you're currently holding.
Yeah, it's a good question. So we definitely with the unusual thing that we found, some of these things you don't know how they're going to play out. But with Western Wealth, for example, and we've got a lot of units there. This right now where we're at represents an all-time high in occupancy, because I think people aren't moving out. Right? If people were going to move out and they decided not to. We actually are still doing value add, and we are still getting pro forma, the pro forma rent increases that we had projected. So bottom line is it has not changed our model too much. I think from the standpoint of just being lean, skeletonizing staff a little bit, really decreasing expenses as much as possible. We've done that. The other thing that I think that we did really well, that served us very well, not only just in case, but also psychologically, is that, when you have a property that is 200 units or 500 units and it's, $50 million asset, you got to run it like a business, right? You're not running it like your landlord. And so if you think about why most businesses fail, it's from undercapitalization, right? And we are very well capitalized, and that psychologically has been really, really helpful too. By the time anything could really hurt us, like, we feel like Fannie Mae would already own 90% of the real estate in the country by the time it got to us.
All right, that makes sense. We're pretty much out of time. I don't know if we have any other questions, but do you get involved with infinite banking, or I know people call it different things. Is that something that you talk about?
Yeah, I do. We call it a wealth formula banking. So there's that too, wealthformulabanking.com. Some really good strategies there. We also, we have some ultra high net worth versions of that. We have, some people in our group who qualify for some more advanced strategies, and we do a lot of strategy work along with this stuff.
Maybe we can have you back on again. I know you got to run, but it's one of the things I found to be really useful. It's basically, you can explain it better than me, but buying, whole life insurance, and basically you put the money in there, and you can then, you get a set return, but you can borrow that money back to use it for investments while you're still earning interest. So basically you have money in two different places.
Yeah, it is a pretty incredible strategy where it allows you to invest the same money in two places at the same time. But if anyone's interested, we do webinars on that, and they're sitting at wealthformulabanking.com, and you can just watch those as well. And there's no accreditation status for that. I mean, anybody can typically.
Yeah, there's not that limit. Yeah, and Natalia, if you can throw that website in there, Wealth Formula Banking.
Taking care of it now, yeah.
What's that?
Taking care of it now.
Okay, thank you. All right, I know we only had Buck super busy. We only had him till 4. Do we have? All right, looks like we have one last question from Maria. Are you there, Maria?
How is it? Yes. Are tenants paying rent, or they're playing the cards like we can't pay rent because we're unemployed, or what are you doing to correct that?
Well, it's interesting, Maria. I'll tell you again. We've actually had pretty good luck, and I think I hate to say it, but I think it goes back again to the idea that we buy real estate in Texas and Arizona and all these places where, I mean, and we're also in working class places where, I think a lot of people were still working, and then when they weren't working, they got unemployment checks, and the first thing people pay is for food, and then they pay their rent, and they're staying home, right? So we do have some people on payment plans, but overall, our collections from March to April went up. And in May, they're comparable to what's happening in April. So we don't have, fortunately for us, I mean, again, we don't, I know in California, a lot of owners are having some issues, particularly because of rent strikes and that kind of thing, but we're just not seeing that. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, so much of our property is in these places where they don't have the same politics, and they right now with unemployment checks and all that, some people are making more money than they did before. So
that makes sense. Well, again, thank you so much, Buck. We really appreciate your time. If we have all the information in the chat for ways to reach out to Buck. If you, I've been planning on doing something with Buck, but he's not buying right now. But if you want to talk to somebody that you all know, Eileen Meehan, who runs our Tenafly office, has done several deals with Buck and has had great results. If you want a reference for Buck, just reach out to Eileen. I don't think she's on this call right now, but she's been super happy. Anything you want to say, Buck?
No, I think good. Just thanks for having me. Maybe hopefully next year we'll actually get to see you in person again.
Yeah, we're looking forward to doing that in person again for sure, as soon as we're allowed.
All right.
Thanks for your time. Good luck. And we really appreciate all your expertise and knowledge.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Have a great day, everybody. Got to jump on
Thank you.
another Zoom.
All right. Hope everybody has a happy Wednesday. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks.